In 1948, an archaeological team crawling through a bat-filled cave in the New Mexico desert was looking for the usual signs of ancient life, like stone tools and pottery fragments. Instead, sitting next to the cold remains of ancient cooking fires, they found tiny blackened ears of corn with burst kernels. Similar remains unearthed in Peru date back 6,700 years. That means people were eating this specific food thousands of years before the Great Pyramid was built, before Stonehenge, and roughly a millennium before anyone in the region had even figured out how to make ceramic pots. These were coastal communities, living without metal tools, written language, or standard kitchenware. Yet through early trial and error, they figured out how to take this one particular type of seed, hold it over intense heat, and force it to physically explode into something edible. This ancient popcorn was an early, specific anomaly, a specialized result of an ongoing agricultural experiment that would eventually transform a wild grass into a staple crop for the Americas. Out of all the varieties of maize humans eventually cultivated, only one type actually pops, Zea maize averta. It has a uniquely thick, nearly airtight outer shell called the pericarp, which seals in a dense pocket of starch and exactly 13 to 14% moisture. When you heat that kernel, the internal moisture turns to steam. Regular corn has porous hulls that let that steam escape. Popcorn traps it. The pressure inside the kernel climbs rapidly. At exactly 356 degrees Fahrenheit, the internal pressure hits roughly 135 pounds per square inch, about 9 times normal atmospheric pressure. The hull simply cannot contain that force. It ruptures, and the superheated starch, which has already absorbed the steam to become a thick gel, instantly expands outward. As it hits the cooler air, it solidifies in a fraction of a second. High-speed photography reveals the mechanics behind that expansion. The first bit of erupting starch actually acts like a microscopic leg. It kicks the ground, physically launching the kernel into the air. When popcorn jumps in a hot pan, it is literally vaulting off the metal. For centuries, this tiny natural pressure cooker remained highly localized, eventually becoming so revered that the Aztecs draped garlands of it over statues of their rain god. Taking this sacred exploding seed and turning it into a global industry required crossing paths with modern engineering. The agricultural foundation for that industry started roughly 9,000 years ago in southern Mexico. Indigenous farmers cultivated a wild grass called teosinte. Over centuries of selective breeding, choosing the thickest stalks and largest kernels, they engineered it into the robust crops that fed early empires. By the 1880s, booming American cities created a massive demand for cheap street food. In Illinois, a candy store owner named Charles Craters bought a failing peanut roasting machine. Instead of returning it, he redesigned the entire mechanism from the ground up. By 1893, Craters had built a steam-powered street cart that could pop and season corn uniformly in its own oil. Every single kernel came out tasting exactly the same. He took a campfire novelty and turned it into a standardized, mass-produced product. These mobile carts brought the aroma of hot food directly to the sidewalks, drawing huge crowds. While urbanization mobilized the snack, a catastrophic economic collapse would soon force it indoors and place it at the center of American culture. In the 1920s, movie theaters were actively hostile toward popcorn. Owners wanted their venues to rival upscale opera houses, complete with plush carpets and chandeliers. They refused to let patrons grind noisy street food into their expensive rugs. Then the stock market crashed. As the Great Depression gutted the economy, movie attendance cratered, and theater owners found themselves desperate for revenue. Out on the street, a 5-cent bag of food was one of the few luxuries families could still afford. To survive, desperate theaters began leasing lobby space to the very street vendors they had previously banned. It didn't take long for theater owners to realize they were giving away their best asset. Raw kernels were cheap to buy in bulk, and when popped, the profit margin hit a staggering 80%. Theaters soon cut out the vendors entirely, and in many locations, the concession stand began generating more revenue than the actual movies. A decade later, World War II rationing abruptly cut off the supply of sugar across the United States. Candy production plummeted, and chocolate disappeared from theater lobbies. Popcorn, requiring zero sugar, filled the vacuum instantly. Americans ate 3 times more of it during the war, permanently cementing its monopoly at the cinema. Theaters that sold it survived. Those that refused went under. Popcorn acted as a financial life raft deployed during the 2 greatest economic crises of the 20th century. By the 1950s, a new threat emerged, the television set. Americans started staying home to watch entertainment for free. As theater attendance plummeted, concession sales went down with it. The industry needed a way to follow the audience right into their living rooms. Solving the at-home problem required refining the genetics of the seed itself. An agronomist named Orville Redenbacher spent 40 years crossing 30,000 hybrid varieties. By 1965, he perfected a kernel that popped at a 44-to-1 expansion ratio, leaving almost no hard duds behind in the bowl. The technological heat source came from an accident in a weapons research lab. A military radar engineer named Percy Spencer was testing a magnetron tube when he noticed a chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. He grabbed a handful of kernels, held them near the device, and watched them burst. The first time popcorn was cooked using microwave radiation. By combining Redenbacher's genetic hybrid with the rapid heat of microwave radiation, companies created a shelf-stable bag that cooked perfectly in 3 minutes. It completely bypassed the theater lobby, putting hot, fresh snacks directly into nearly every American pantry. Today, Americans consume more than 14 billion quarts of it every single year. The global market now exceeds $9 billion, with modern theaters still heavily relying on the 1,000% markups at the concession stand. The modern popcorn bag is the result of 9,000 years of selective breeding and ancient indigenous ingenuity. It is a piece of ancient technology that repeatedly used extreme pressure to survive, adapt, and eventually conquer the globe.